this presentation from elementary school all the way through high schools, through colleges, as well as these parent presentations tonight. So we're really happy to have her with us today. We always try to do a presentation in the fall that deals with peer interactions, right? Like we've done some in the past on cyberbullying and internet safety and all those things. So we try to do stuff with the kids coming back together, especially after this long break. We try to do something on helping them and helping parents with those kind of interactions. And then in the spring, we always try to do a drug prevention presentation. So we're very lucky to have Anna with us tonight. And so I will not take any more of her time. So here's Anna.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. I love doing parent presentations like this because I always think about when I'm getting these lessons ready, what information am I sharing with the kids and what information would be beneficial to pass on to you, and kind of how I can marry those ideas together to kind of give you the right information, give the kids the right information, and kind of combine them to maybe have some lines kind of cross with it. So I love doing parent presentations, especially on relationships. So I'm going to make this a lot about friendships, but even when I do healthy friendship lessons with the kids, I always say to them, these qualities and these things apply throughout your life. Every relationship you're going to have, whether we're talking about friendships, you know, when we find a partner in our life, we want them to have those same qualities of trust and honesty and respect, right? Just as we want our friends to have, and we want our friends to teach us or treat us, and then all of the other interactions and relationships that we have in our lives. So I kind of want you to keep that in mind, that this is going to be focused on friendships, but a lot of this information will still pertain as they're starting to get older, maybe as they start dating, meeting new friends, things like that. But these things equally pertain to that. So I'll tell you a little bit about Friends Inc. A lot of people in the county kind of know who we are. A lot of people know we have a shelter, and that's really kind of where their knowledge lies of what Friends is. So I work at Friends Inc. I'm a prevention educator, all of our school and community-based education. So at Friends Inc., we're a domestic violence, sexual assault, and child abuse agency. We've been in the community since 1978. So a long time. We started with our shelter. It's a very big program. That's why people know us that way. But we are the sole provider of these specialized services in Washington County. And so we have all of these different services, including our 24-hour hotline. We have our emergency shelter. We have advocacy and support group, legal assistance. We have a therapist, and then prevention education. All of the services that we offer are completely free and confidential. So no one would ever know if you're coming to get services from us unless you chose to disclose that information. And another thing that I like to plug, can you guys hear me okay? I don't have the mic on, I like to project. So we serve primary and secondary victims. So I'm going to explain a little bit to you what that means. So primary victim is our person that abuse happened to, directly happened to. A secondary victim is going to be maybe friends or family members who are really struggling and trying to figure out how to support their loved one as they navigate something that has happened to them. So we're able to provide services to not only our direct victims, but our secondary victims as well. So it's something important to keep in mind, that we are there for our victims and survivors, but we're also there for the people in their life who need some extra support. So there's a few different things we're going to cover today. And as I was creating this, I was thinking about, you know, the most important things to share with you. I always tell my parents who come out to my lessons that you all are doing the best that you can, and I know that you're already doing, you know, maybe even a little bit better than some other people because you're here and you want to figure out how to navigate these things. These issues are important to you. So I always like to also tell the parents in the room that, you know, you are experts in yourself and you're experts in your children. I hope that this is just some information that could be helpful in helping you navigate this, because we all know that middle school things get really confusing and you start to meet new people, and some people are really nice and some people aren't nice, and it's a really difficult time in children's lives. I've worked with middle schoolers for quite a few years now, And it's one of my favorite because they're challenged, they're really hard, they're figuring things out. They don't really know a lot about relationships, right? We go from elementary school to everybody's friends and invites everyone in the classroom to their birthday parties, to middle school where, you know, you're the only one who doesn't get invited to the sleepover. So a lot of those dynamics change, and I think it's really important that, you know, kids feel that support in their life as they're going through these times. So I want to kind of talk a little bit about how to identify these healthy, unhealthy, or toxic, you might hear me refer to them as toxic relationships. You can kind of use them interchangeably. Recognizing the warning signs of bullying, and I think those kind of can translate over into these unhealthy relationships as well. Teaching boundary setting and conflict resolution. This is one of my favorite things because I was never taught about what boundaries were until I entered into a job in this field where they're like, you have to have boundaries. And I'm like, what is boundary? No one ever taught me that. So I think it's something that parents and caregivers can do that makes a huge difference in kids' lives. And then I also just kind of wanted to talk about how to support your teen and help them kind of navigate these friendship issues. If you have questions throughout, feel free to ask them. If you want to save them for the end, you can do that as well. So we'll first start with identifying these healthy and unhealthy or toxic friendships. So some things that I kind of wanted to keep in mind when we think about teens and friendships is once we get into middle and high school, where friendships become super important, right? They're kind of the focus of the kids. And maybe it's not so much of a focus on family anymore. They're trying to branch out. They're trying to become their own person. They want to spend more time with their friends. So when we're talking about teens and friendships and relationships, it's really important to keep in mind that friendships and social life are extremely important at this age. They still love and care about you, even when they seem distant or even when it seems like they hate you. They still love you guys. It's just that friendships have such a core part of their life when they're in this space. I think it's also important to kind of foster this loving environment where they can feel safe and comfortable. So I put on here to avoid punishment if your child comes to you to self-disclose something. Now, you're the parent, you kind of know where that lies, right? On like, okay, this is something that there should definitely be consequences to, right? But I always like to mention to my parents, when your kid is coming to you and telling you things, even if it's not exactly something you want to hear, trying to avoid that judgment and trying to avoid, you know, like the severe punishment for something that's small, just because we want to foster this environment that they feel comfortable, that they can come and tell us things without repercussions, without a fear of repercussions. Makes a huge difference. And something I didn't put on here, but something that I've definitely noticed with my middle school kids is a lot of them will say like, I'm not really comfortable telling my parent this right now. Can I tell another safe and trusted adult? And I always encourage them, yeah, right? Tell someone. So even if that's something that you're comfortable with too, right? Who are these other safe and trusted adults in your life? If you kind of need some extra guidance and you're not really comfortable talking to me about this, who can you talk to, right? Because now it's like they have the internet and you can Google anything and you kind of, whatever you find is your answer, right? So we really want to kind of foster that idea of coming to some adult in your life to tell what's going on, to get some guidance on that. And then just, I think something else really important is identifying what you value in your relationships and model these qualities. So like if honesty is really important to you in your relationships, model that, right? Talk to them and be honest with them. If respect is really important, keeping that in mind, right? Like, I know I'm a parent, I know I have the authority, but how can I show my child respect in this instance? So thinking about what are those values that you have in a relationship and how can you bring those values from those other relationships into the relationship with your child? You know, like that trust, honesty, respect, all of those things, like how can I bring this into the relationship with my child? I think something that is really important to teach teens about is that friendships, they change and shift over time. I'm sure a lot of us can think like, yeah, I still talk to my friends that I made in elementary school. And then some of us are like, no, I don't talk to any of those people, right? So making sure that they're aware that it's okay for friendships to change, right? We can still be sad about it. If someone doesn't want to be our friend anymore, right, we can still feel sad about that. But knowing that that's normal, that relationships just change over time. And sometimes relationships, they're just not the right fit for us. We have to let that go and form new relationships in our life. I think teaching them that it's okay to form these new relationships. So if they have this friend who's starting to get really jealous that, you know, they're hanging out with the people that they met in this new club or whatever that might be, right? Just reinstilling that idea of like, it's okay to have other friends. Like, I have a lot of friends. It's okay for you to have a lot of friends. And I put like, your friend should allow you, right? Because it's like, well, of course your friend should allow you to have friends, other friends, right? But keeping that message out to them about like, your friends should be okay if you have other friends, right? If this is a secure friendship, then, you know, we're good. So I think just that about like, if there are friends starting to isolate them in a sense, I think even just like kind of, I always like the idea of like planting seeds, right? Like my coworker was just asking me, she's like, my 4-year-old granddaughter, in daycare, we think that there's something going on. She doesn't want to go to daycare. So how can we like ask her questions if something is going on? And I was like, I think a lot of it is like planting seeds. You're watching a movie. So I gave her an example of Toy Story, you know, and I'm like, you're watching Toy Story with a kid. So you're like, oh, that's really nice that Woody's friends treat him that way. Or that's really nice that Woody's friends did that for him. Or, oh, that doesn't really seem like a very nice thing for a friend to do. I know that's like 4-year-old speak, right? But planting these little seeds even about like pointing out when something doesn't seem, especially in media, because kids connect so well to media, pointing out those examples and kind of like planting those little seeds. So even if you're suspecting that maybe they're friends with someone who isn't really a great fit for them, finding these little like media examples, these little moments for you to be able to kind of like plant these seeds of what's normal. I think something else too, and I think it takes a lot of us a long time to realize this, but that disagreements are normal and okay. Disrespect is not. And when I'm teaching healthy, unhealthy relationships to students, I've even had like a student say like, well, isn't it healthy to fight? And I was like, well, it's healthy to disagree, right? It's healthy to kind of have different views on things, to talk through things, right? And I'm like, if you're in blow up fights every day, that's not healthy, right? So kind of teaching the difference between that of like what is normal conflict in relationships, and then maybe what is patterns you're noticing of excessive conflicts, of fighting all the time, about them putting the child down, things like that. And like I said, but disrespect is not normal and okay. And kind of can point those things out gently. That real friends don't pressure you into doing things you want to do. I think in middle school, it's like, of course, we all know about peer pressure. We talk about it in school. But I think really even still driving that point home. And then true friends accepting you for who you are. It's another thing I tell my students. It's like true healthy relationships, they accept you for who you are. They don't want to change you. They don't want to make you different. They take you as you are. And they love you for exactly the person that you are. So I think that's another really important thing to drive home with the kids. So as I'm going into kind of this toxic, unhealthy friendships, I just wanted to kind of put this definition that I found out about an unhealthy relationship that hurts you emotionally. It can result in things like low self-esteem, isolation, and acting in ways that you otherwise wouldn't. So I think a lot of times when we have these unhealthy or toxic friendships, the kids might start acting in a way that they normally wouldn't. Whether that's like that peer pressure thing of it, whether they feel like they have to change to be accepted by that person, those behavior shifts are going to be really noticeable when they're in these unhealthy relationships. And again, this really relates even back to the dating relationships down the road when they get into those, about, you know, kind of acting differently, not in a positive way, kind of in this negative way. So I think some things that are really important to teach your teens about this like on edge feeling with when you spend time together. Like, are you nervous? I always tell kids, think about like, how does that relationship make you feel? When you're with that person, how do you feel, right? Like, do you feel nervous? Do you feel scared, right? Trying to get them to tap into those feelings. Because I always tell them like those feelings tell a huge story. If I feel excited when that person texts me, if I feel happy to go and spend time with them, right, that's going to really signal to me that that's a good, healthy relationship. So kind of tapping into those feelings and feeling kind of this like walking on eggshells feeling is not a healthy friendship kind of quality to have. Even too with them about like, you don't like the person that you are when you're around them. So tying back to that comfortability thing, that taking you as you are, right? If they start thinking about like, I don't really like the person I'm becoming around them, and I'm gonna get to it later, but even of like pointing out things like, hey, when you hang out with so-and-so, you just always seem really upset when you get home, right? So, or you just kind of seem angry when you get home. So gently pointing that out about like trying to show them a little bit about who are you when you're with them? Do you like who you are when you're with that person? If the answer is no, or not a definite yes, right, that's a problem. They make you feel emotionally exhausted is a huge thing. Like really being in tune for like, again, how does that person make you feel? Are you constantly feeling like you have to be there for them? They aren't there for you, right? That they don't listen to you when you're talking to them, that they're constantly trying to tell you what to do, right? The feeling of being emotionally exhausted. Rarely hanging out with your other friends anymore. So when I teach my students about isolation, right? Being an unhealthy relationship quality, I always explain to them the importance of the relationships that we have in our life. Like, of course, right? I love my husband, he's the best. But like my best friend gives me something different in my life that he can't give me. And that's fine. So I think explaining that to them about every relationship that we have in our life is really important. And it's important that we foster those relationships and we spend time with people that we enjoy spending time with. You never treat someone the way this friend treats you, thinking about like that phrase, right? So treat others the way that you want to be treated. I'm sure so many of you have told your children that phrase even too. So if you would never treat a friend this way, I also tell my students too, and this is a lot more on like the self-esteem thing, but I always say like, would you ever talk to a friend the way that you're talking to yourself right now? If the answer is no, right, then this maybe isn't the right person for you. Maybe isn't the right friend for you. Because if you would never treat anyone that way, if you would never talk to anyone that way, that's kind of that red flag in our mind that maybe this isn't the right fit for us. And then right of like putting in more than you're getting out. Do you feel like you're kind of carrying the weight of the friendship? When we think about relationships, they're a two-way street, right? Both people should be involved. There should be compromise. One person shouldn't be doing all the work, trying to maintain the friendship. Right? If someone wants to be your friend, they're going to be your friend. So really teaching that, and they're going to be a good friend. So really teaching those kind of basics. So these were just some things that I found that I thought were kind of helpful. But how to help your child avoid unhealthy friendships, teaching them what good friends are. And I think even too about like encouraging them to make friends in many different places. So whether that's like their friends from sports, their friends from schools, their friends from clubs, church, neighbors, right? encouraging them to make these friendships in many different places. So it doesn't feel maybe so isolating and alone. If one of those friends isn't a good fit for them, they still have a network of support and other people that they're friends with. Communicating openly with your child about their feelings and relationships. So, you know, asking them these questions, asking them about their friends, asking them when they seem sad, hey, what's going on? Do you want to talk about it? But because when we do that, it really opens the door to kind of make them feel like maybe they aren't ready to share what they're feeling right now. But you've shown interest, you've shown that you want to know how they're feeling, you want to know about their friends. So it's going to allow them to kind of just feel safer to share that information with you. And I also think too, getting to know your child's friends, and even if you're comfortable, their parents too. I think just even getting to know their friends. I even think about like the times when, of course, your kids, you don't want to hear it, but like even when my mom, when I was younger, about like, that friend doesn't seem like a good friend, right? Like, I just don't get a good feeling about them. And kids don't want to hear that, right? But you're going to be able to even pick up on things and maybe kind of get ahead. Remember, like you said, plant those little seeds. And then if the friendship becomes unhealthy, this one is pretty simple, but not confronting that unhealthy friend. And I think like I even teach that when I'm doing like the abuse prevention is I'm like, you know, that typically will make things worse, right? Not only will it make things worse for the relationship that you have with the child and the friend, right? But sometimes that even kind of pushes kids to take more interest in that friend because they're, you know, trying to be little rebels. But so it could kind of do the opposite effect of what you're hoping for in that situation. And this is what I was talking about before. If they start acting out with this bad behavior, focus on the behavior. So instead of saying like, I don't want you hanging out with so-and-so anymore, remember of using that like, hey, when you come home from hanging out with so-and-so, I've noticed that you seem upset. I noticed that you seem really worried. So kind of phrasing it in that way. Also of just like starting to pick up, starting to ask little questions. So they're like, I want to talk about it. Don't push, right? Okay, well, if you ever want to talk about it, just let me know. And I think that avoiding criticizing and blaming kind of coming to the back of like with teens and kids, you tell them that they can't do something, they're going to want to do it even more, right? You start criticizing their friend, they want to hang out with that friend even more. So avoiding that criticizing or blaming. And I think that using your own friendship experiences as an example to teach, not to tell what to do, right? But like, yeah, I remember when I was younger, I kind of had a friend who did that too. This is what happened and, you know, this is what I did about it. So using your own friendship experiences to teach, not necessarily to tell what to do. Let's see, where else am I here? Okay. So some things about dealing with these unhealthy friendships with the kids. I think some things where when they start opening up, start sharing more with you, and maybe even proposing like, hey, do you like, maybe it's okay to get some space. A lot of times when I'm talking to kids about this stuff is they're like, oh, well, if you tell someone you need space, it means that you hate them, right? And I'm like, it doesn't, right? Having space is healthy. It's okay. It doesn't mean it's the end of anything. Right? It just means that you just distance yourself a little bit just to have some time to yourself. And I think when you do that of like saying, how does it feel to have this space? Are you feeling like really relieved? Because that's, you know, not a great sign of who that friend is to you. Or are you feeling like something is missing? Because if you feel like something is missing, that's obviously an important person to you. It's something that with conflict resolution, it can be worked out. So I think even of just like asking those questions even too about like, hey, like, how does it feel that you haven't really been hanging out with this person? Because that'll give them an idea. It'll get them to start thinking like, yeah, you know what? I do feel better not hanging out with this person anymore. I think even encouraging them to revisit their friend network. So exactly what I was talking about before of having friends in multiple places. So thinking about that, like, have you neglected some friendships? Like, have you been only hanging out with that one person all the time and you aren't spending time with the other friends that you have? Maybe you're not like sitting with them anymore, right? So kind of getting back in touch with those people, spending time with them. And that will even sometimes kind of get their wheels turning of like, wait, these friends, I feel happy when I go hang out with them. But this other friend, I don't feel that way with. So kind of encouraging them to spend time with other people. And then having them kind of reevaluate their friend group. Like, is this friendship the best fit for me? And I think a good way to do that is even like a simple pros and cons list about like, I just want you to think, like, what are the pros to having this person in your life? What's the pros to having this person as a friend? And maybe what are kind of the cons? What are some things that bother you? If they have a huge column in the cons, that's going to speak for itself when they look at that, right? So that's a great way to do it, is just even a simple pros and cons list, or be like, let's just talk it out. You know, what do you think is the good things about being friends with this person? And then I think too about knowing when to cut people out of your life when necessary and move on. It's their call if they want to cut that friend off and move on. But something else, like with my students too, about they get nervous about, and maybe it's like the phrase cut people out, right? It's not necessarily a friendly phrase, but I think just in like telling kids, and I always phrase it, some people just aren't the right fit for us, and that's okay. Some people just don't mesh well together. We don't really have similar personalities. We don't get along, and that's okay. And we can kind of split apart, and it doesn't have to be a big deal, and I don't have to hate them. So I think even too of like explaining that to kids about like, you know, it doesn't have to be a big thing. If it does become a big thing, we'll handle it, right? We'll talk through it. But I think kind of giving that message to kids too, that like, it's okay that people aren't the right fit. You're going to find that throughout your whole life, in any place you go, in any relationships that you have, that there are some people you just do not mesh with. But kind of instilling that thing about like, yeah, we might not mesh well with them, but we're still respectful and we're still kind, right? We still keep those values. So I just wanted to put in kind of a brief thing about recognizing the signs of bullying. Because I think that these signs can maybe even be easily dismissed, but they're things that are pretty common when we see bullying, or even like this larger friendship issue, if something is really just weighing on them. So it might not necessarily be a bullying situation. It might just be a friend who, you know, is a really unhealthy friend to them, is really making them feel badly about themselves. So I just kind of wanted to start on what is bullying. This is what I teach to my students about. It's kind of this real or perceived power imbalance, but it's targeted aggressive behavior. So I explained to them it's repeated. It's something that keeps happening over and over and over again, right? It's not a one-off thing. And I always teach them that disrespect is different from being mean, and being mean is different from bullying, right? There are kind of these tiers that we have here. Disrespect, I teach them, is like, it's maybe a one-off thing, like they made fun of my new shoes, right? It's not nice, disrespectful. It's something that's happened once. It made me feel bad, right? But we have this instance of disrespect. And then when we get into this bullying, it's this repeated thing. It's some like keeps happening. And I always ask my students, does it have to be the same action over and over and over again? No, right? Usually it's multiple different actions. It's just repeated behaviors. And I explained to them that it's on purpose, right? It's not an accident. They know what they're doing. It is on purpose, and it's hurtful to our bodies, feelings, both. So these were just some of the things that I thought were really important, because I think a lot of times the physical effects of it are really common with kids, about like these headaches or stomach aches, or I feel sick, I don't want to go to school, right? It's kind of these like physical manifestations of stress. So kind of that feeling sick or faking illness could also be part of this. And when I explain these things, I'm like, yeah, usually it's these things compounded on top of each other, right? It's not just them having declining grades. It's usually multiple of these things that are occurring. So it could be like that depression, loneliness, general anxiety, like I said, to go to school, to go to the football game, right? To see somebody in the store, right? It's just these feelings of worry and anxiety. It could be, right, that physical of those unexplained injuries, or even like lost or destroyed material items, things like that. But a lot of what I'm seeing with my students is it's things that are happening in person, usually like emotionally based things, and then things that are happening online. That's the largest of what I'm seeing. Of course, there's still physical bullying going on, but I think a lot of what, you know, was normal even years ago, since the invention of the internet, so much of that has moved online. Let me see, I got that one right. Even like of changes in eating habits, or like they're having a difficulty sleeping, or maybe they're like sleeping way more than they ever were, or they're having these nightmares, these declining grades, loss of interest in schoolwork, not wanting to go to school, or even just like a general loss in their interests. Like they suddenly don't want to do the things that they used to like to do before. Even too about like this sudden loss of friends. If they used to be doing things all the time with their friends, and suddenly like they're home every single weekend, and you're like, that just seems off. That seems different from what we're used to. Or these avoidance of social situations, that they love to go to the football game with their friends, and all of a sudden they're like, I don't want to go, right? It might just be that thing of like, this is an interesting observation, I'm gonna keep my eye on this. And then just decreased self-esteem is a huge thing about just like them putting themselves down a lot. And these are a lot more of the more intense things, and hopefully there's intervention done before that point. But of course, there could be like the behaviors such as running away, engaging in like high-risk behavior, self-harm, or talks of suicide. So like I said, these are usually more of our intensive ones when something maybe hasn't been addressed and there hasn't been intervention done. But a lot of what we see, a lot of what I see with students and here is a lot of these physical manifestations, and that like loss of friends, avoidance of social situations. Is there any questions on that? So now we get to kind of the fun part about the boundary setting, the thing that I love to teach the most. Because like I said, so many of us just haven't really been taught this information. And I think even as grown-ups, it's really important that, you know, we set boundaries as well in our life. So I found this quote, and I really think that this is such a good way of describing it. It's, boundaries don't mean I don't love you. They mean that I'm going to love you and I'm going to love myself at the same time, right? I'm going to respect you, but I'm also going to respect my own wants, my own needs, my own feelings as well in the process of that. So I think when I'm thinking about boundary setting with parents, I'm going to come back to this part. We have these 4 types of boundaries. So we have our material, right? So that's like your friend wants to borrow your brand new set of headphones, and you're like, I don't want to let my friend borrow my brand new set of headphones. It's okay to say, hey, you know, I don't really want to share those right now, but I have this other pair in my bag that you could use, right? Or even just of like, hey, you know, I'm going to use them. I don't really want to share them right now. Physical, so I explain this to students, like an example I might use. I know when I was back in school years and years ago, there would be like friends who would come up and like hug you from behind, right? Or people who would come and like poke your side, right? Like those physical things where you're not comfortable with. So your friend comes up and hugs you from behind every day, and you're allowed to say to that friend, like, hey, I really don't like when you come up and hug me from behind because I don't know who it is, and I'm just not comfortable with So those are kind of our physical boundaries, anything that has to do with the physical body and something that might make you feel uncomfortable. Some people don't like hugs, right? So being able to say like, hey, I really don't like a hug. Can I get a high five? Things like that. Our emotional boundaries are kind of drawing this line of something that someone might do that emotionally might bother you. So an emotional boundary could be that you have this, I always put examples up and now I'm drawing a blank. Our emotional boundaries would be really like, hey, when, this is an example for me. So obviously I work in a really difficult field to work in. I work with people who are abused. It's really difficult content to hear, right? So for me, I always like to say to, you know, my husband or my best friend, hey, are you okay with me sharing this difficult thing that happened at work? Right? That's a great opportunity for me to be able to say like, hey, are you okay with me sharing this with you? That gives them an opportunity to put up a boundary and be like, you know what, actually, I had a really rough day. I'd really prefer not to hear about that. I also kind of like say to the kids too, I'm like thinking about even like people who might even like message me about some really emotional things. Again, this is kind of coming back to me and the work that I do, right? But people who might continuously message me for support navigating this abusive situation. Of course, I want to help everybody, right? But for me, that might look like, hey, here's just this little bit of helpful information. But if you want to call friends and talk with an advocate, you know, it would be great. I'd love to get you set up with someone. So it's kind of just coming back to, you know, me, but thinking about like those ways that we can set emotional boundaries with other people. When people do something that really bothers you emotionally, it's that opportunity to be like, hey, I really don't like this thing that you did. It hurt my feelings. It makes me feel uncomfortable. You know, can we please do things differently? And digital, I say to students too, this might be like they maybe like share things to share things to you, tag things on social media. They posted a picture where you're like, I just don't like that picture. We're just really silly in it. And I just didn't want everybody to see that. You know, nothing wrong with the picture, but it gives the kids the opportunity to be like, hey, I really don't, you know, want you to post these pictures without my permission. Things like that. So boundaries are just our way of drawing a line and being like, this thing happened. I didn't like it. Can we do things differently next time? It's about being able to communicate our wants and needs and feelings with the people in our life that we care about and giving them the opportunity to kind of make a change or do things differently to respect our boundaries, our emotional wants, needs, and feelings. So I think as parents, I think that it is fair to be firm about your rules. Like, you know what, in this house, this is how we do things. So being able to be firm about your rules, stay firm in those, and your own personal boundaries too. Being able to identify when someone has drawn a line and even mirroring that to the kids, right, in an appropriate way. But even mirroring those situations where you draw a line, you draw a boundary. You know, knowing what to disclose to them and what not to, right? But I think even too with kids about like being able to give them an out if they're in an uncomfortable, unsafe, awkward situation. Just teaching them that you'll support them, you'll help them when they need it. So if they're at a sleepover and, you know, they feel really uncomfortable by something that's happening, like, you know what, you just text me this keyword, I'll come and pick you up, right? Or anything like that about just being able to give them an out. If their friends are trying to pressure them into doing something that they don't want to do, blame it on the parent, right? My mom or my dad would be so upset if they found out I do that. I can't do that, right? Even letting you kind of be the scapegoat in that situation, giving them permission to kind of do that too. Because it helps them to identify like what are things that I'm uncomfortable by, right? And knowing that they have that support and they have that help if they ever need it. And that can kind of come back to that thing that I was telling you about, right? About like maybe trying to avoid punishment if it's something that could be taught and could be a teaching moment with them. Giving them the chance to set their own boundaries and being able to allow them to kind of make their own choices to a certain extent, right? I think that there's the power of choice, and even if it's like, okay, well, I'm saying that you can do this or you can do that, right? Even giving them that choice can make a huge difference. I think trying to understand where they're coming from. So you can even ask them to tell you more about, why they set that boundary, or why it's important to them. Why is it important to you that, people respect this digital boundary that you set? Trying to understand where they're coming from with these boundaries. And then teaching them to honor the boundaries that other people set is huge. And I tell my students that too, mostly my elementary kids in our respect lessons. I'm like, if someone tells you, stop, I don't like that you're doing that, right? You listen to them. They are the expert in themselves. They are setting a boundary with you. They're asking you to stop. We're listening to them, right? So I think that's really important to teach kids and teens too, about like honoring the boundaries that other people set as well. And this is really basic, but I think it's really important to even teach them this. Like, how do you assert a boundary? Well, you recognize when that line has been crossed. Someone has done something that you don't like, something that's made you feel uncomfortable. Step 2 is being able to have an honest conversation about it. I even tell the kids, it can be so simple. Hey, I really don't like when you call me that nickname. I just don't like that nickname. It really bothers me. Can you please stop? Can we please come up with a different nickname for me? So simple, but it's a huge message. And I think a lot of times people are afraid of conflict. They're afraid to communicate these things. But just kind of showing them, even in the relationship you have with your child, that it's okay to have these relationships. So many people think conflict is like the worst thing in the world. And a lot of times conflict gives us the opportunity to grow and make meaningful changes. And then about letting them know what that boundary is and sticking to it. So if you set a boundary, you don't let people cross that boundary consistently. You don't make exceptions for it, right? You stick with that boundary that you set. I think that's a huge thing, because a lot of times people set a boundary and not stick with it. They won't assert that boundary. And what does that tell the other person? I can cross your boundaries, no problem. You're going to forgive me. You're going to forget about it. You'll never bring it up again. So I think really being able to kind of encourage them to stick to that boundary, but also whatever boundaries that you all have, right? Sticking with that, remaining consistent. It'll send a really meaningful message. So just some conflict resolution and relationships, just that ability to kind of calm down and cool off. If they're in a fight with their friend, a disagreement with their friend, like, it's okay to step back and cool off for a little bit. I'll tell my students, if their friend and them are in an argument and they're texting and their friend is like, we have to talk about this right now. I'm like, you don't, right? But you don't ignore them, but you say things like, I just need a minute to cool off. Can we talk about this a little bit later? Sharing their feelings and listening to what that other person is saying. So many of us, right, we talk, and as the other person is speaking to us, we're thinking about the next thing we're going to say to kind of prove our point. So many of us do it. It's so normal to do, right? But encouraging them, listen to what that other person is saying. I think responsibility and accountability for what they say or do is so important. Like, I even think about just like a little disagreement that my husband and I had, right? And we kind of like stepped away for a minute. I'm staying in the kitchen doing what I'm doing. He went and did something else. And later I kind of went upstairs and I was like, hey, I'm really sorry. That was not nice what I said. I shouldn't have said that, right? So that's so important. And I think a lot of times we're not willing to own up when we make a mistake. And maybe when we say something that was mean. It's okay to take accountability for that. And it's a healthy friendship quality to be able to own up to those mistakes. We all make them. So just being able to teach them, right? Like we take accountability for the things that we say or do. We don't excuse our behaviors. We don't try to justify it. If we've done something wrong, we own up to that. I think even too about brainstorming and agreeing on a solution or compromising, finding that middle ground, because if it's a healthy friendship, we're just going through a rough patch, right? When we do this conflict resolution, when we try to find a compromise, when we talk through it, it can easily be solved, right? When we have these healthy friendships, these healthy relationships. This feeling of affirming their feelings, right? Like I can see how you would feel that way. Right? Forgiving. I forgive you for saying that thing that hurt my feelings. Maybe that's when you set the boundary, right? And thanking them. Like, thank you for telling me that. I'm really happy that you told me this thing that I do hurt your feelings, so I can grow and change from that. So I can listen to what you're saying. And I think teaching the assertive response so basic, but so helpful in situations using these I statements. Well, you do that, you do that, you do that, instead of saying, like, hey, when you call me that nickname, it really hurts my feelings because, in third grade, people used to call me that to make me feel bad about myself. You know what I'm saying? So like being able to use these I statements instead of accusatory statements. You do this, you do that. So making it more of like, I feel this way when this happens. Keeping calm and using that eye contact, being confident and asserting your boundaries, and voicing their needs and feelings in a clear and respectful way. These are just some pieces of conflict resolution that I think it's really helpful to teach kids. It's normal stuff. So, and it's skills that we all need throughout our life. So really being able to teach them when they're young about these basic conflict resolution. Did everybody get a picture? Want me to get one? Yes? Okay. And then just to kind of wrap up, I wanted to talk about kind of navigating these conversations. So I think we already talked about fostering this trusting relationship. Don't pry, lead by example. 2, I think checking your baggage at the door. This is about their experience, their needs, their feelings. Not about you, right? It's about the kid. So really being able to check your own feelings of not liking this friend, right? All of these other feelings that you might feel, really being able to try to focus on the child about their needs and their feelings in this situation. So kind of going back to that thing, I noticed when you hang out with so-and-so, you behave this way, instead of, I don't want you hanging out with this person because they do this when they come over to our house, right? So being able to kind of just make it focused on them. Treating them like the experts in their own experience. I have a pin on my jacket. It's one of my favorite sayings, right? Treat people as experts in themselves. I can't tell you how you feel, right? Only you can tell me how you feel. So I think with kids, treating them like they are the expert in their own experience. They're the ones going through it, right? You're just observing and seeing on the side, which can be just as powerful, right? But they are the expert in what is going on with them. They're the expert in their own experience, and let them take the lead. If they're not ready to talk about it, don't force it, right? Again, just coming back to these statements of like, whenever you're ready to talk about it, I'm here for you. Planting those little seeds. Once they open up, the key is to listen to them and give them a choice in how the issue is handled. So exactly what I was telling you before about giving them these choices. When you're able, right? Okay, this seems like a really tough situation. Do you want to talk to the school counselor about what's going on? Because this seems to be impacting you at school, right? Or maybe being like, hey, do you want me to talk to their parents? Right? Giving them that choice of how the issue is handled, and just being able to really listen to them. Do you need to ask clarifying questions? Of course, do that, but kind of just let them be able to take the lead on how much they want to share. And then I also think too about coming up with a plan that you and your child on board with. So this is a really good opportunity to discuss those boundary setting and the conflict resolution skills that we were talking about. Well, I really want to stay friends with this person. Okay, well, it kind of sounds like maybe we need to set a little boundary with this person. You don't like it when you know, they leave you out when all of the other kids go out and do something together, right? So being able to kind of teach those instances about like, okay, well, if we want to make this work, let's draw a line. Let's tell them we don't like when we're treated this way. Have a conversation about it using those conflict resolution skills. And lastly, I just had how to help your teen, asking them what you can do to help, reporting what's going on if they're okay with that. So if it's a really, really big problem, and you want to be able to talk to the school counselors, talk to the principal, if they're on board with that choice, and sometimes you're the parent, right? You can kind of make that executive decision if you're like, no, this is where we draw the line, this stops. You're, you know, not sleeping right, your grades are declined, like all of this stuff. This is where we draw this line. Of course, you're the parents, you know, and enough is enough, right? But kind of reporting what's going on if they want that, asking them how you can help, not telling them what you're going to do, but asking them if it's okay that you maybe do this together. Talking with like the friend of the friend's parents maybe about what's going on, if they're okay with that, if you're comfortable with that. Not accusing, your kid always does this, your kid always tells my kid to do things, right? But maybe it is a matter of having a simple conversation with the other parent about what's going on. They might not be aware of it. You might not be aware of something happening. You can kind of come to an agreement on something, figure out what the next best step is. If the friendship ends, support them and validate their experiences. I always say the end of a relationship, right? Whether, and like, I work in a domestic violence agency, so a lot of people, when they leave their abusive partner, it's a really conflicting feeling, right? They're like, well, I love this person, and I know I shouldn't be with this person, but like, there's all these memories and everything like that. It's not easy. Even in an amicable breakup, it's still going to be hard to separate from someone. And same applies with friendships. When a friendship ends, it can be really sad. It can be really lonely. So really being able to validate those feelings too. And then even talking to the school counselor about issues going on. I work mostly with school counselors. And I know that a lot of them do a really great job doing this conflict resolution, maybe bringing the kids in to talk about it together, and even just providing you with extra support. Hey, maybe check out, you know, this website. It could give you really helpful information. So I'm a huge proponent of talking to school counselors. They're kind of the experts of handling these kind of situations as they arise at school with their students. So I don't want to keep you all that much longer. It's late and we're tired and we all work full days. Do you guys have any questions at all? You can always ask me privately after too, but yeah.
My son's an 8th grader, and the only friend that he has in 8th grade is such a difference.
Yeah.
My son's here, his friend like still in 3rd grade. How does he hope to deal with that? I mean, it's so out of hand.
For sure, for sure. And I think too, like in those instances of maybe this difference in maturity, that kind of same age as them, 3rd grade and everything. I think sometimes too, like eventually the kids are going to see that and notice it on their own too. But I think like how I was telling before, right? Like noticing and acknowledging things that he does, that makes him kind of seem more mature. And even if it's just in your normal everyday life, about like, you know, that was a really great job handling that way. Even pointing out those things, sort of like I said, like you plant these seeds, and eventually they're going to start seeing things on their own. I would like to say too, like people aren't going to get involved, people aren't going to do anything about it until they're ready. But you start planting seeds, I think any situation, they're like, you plant these seeds and then they're like, wait, that doesn't seem normal. Or like, yeah, you're like, you did a great job handling this, or I really like how you were really mature. You know, when that person said something and you didn't laugh about it, or whatever that might be. I think that is really helpful, just about pointing out the things that they were doing really well. We might start noticing that a little bit more on their own. Do you guys have anything you wanted to add to that?
I was just thinking that there can be that huge gap, you know, so sometimes your kid just needs somebody to talk to sometimes it's okay for them, like, and just to say, well, I'm really interested in this, I know this is gonna be of interest to you, so that's how I'm gonna go with these friends and do behaviors, that's at a different maturity level. So that's where the boundaries become really important too. So like sometimes the immature behavior could be like that, laughing at something that seems inappropriate or behaving in a way that feels embarrassing to your child, to maybe the mature child. And it's okay to say, you know, it is okay to say to them, I felt embarrassed when you said that to this other person, because I didn't feel that was appropriate. You know, so sometimes practicing those I messages with can be really, really helpful, and it helps them really establish their boundaries well. Because that is really hard when you're both going up together, and now all of a sudden you realize there's a big gap in maturity. But like Anna said, well, it's hard. So, you know, to tell them, well, it just sounds like you were more mature than him, you know, anymore. That's very hard. They're not always ready to walk away. But that doesn't mean you can do that for
And like those things where like, you know, I come in and I teach about difficult topics and sometimes things that it's like kind of uncomfortable to talk about these things. And then kids laugh, like they're two kids sitting next to each other and one of them is laughing. And like Becky said, like the other one like was so visibly like embarrassed. Like we said, like being able to like communicate that to people too. And I think you did a great job saying that to Becky about like, it's okay to say like, hey, I really didn't think that was respectful when you laughed at the speaker when they were talking about that, or you know what I mean? And I always teach kids too, I'm like, the way that you say something is going to be way different than the way that I'm going to say something, right? About like us being like, I don't think that's appropriate when you did that, but teaching them to find their own ways of communicating that in a way that's comfortable to them. I hope that's helpful. Yeah.
I have a question. You were making us aware of signs that our kid could do.
Yeah.
The opposite of that. What are the signs that your kid is doing? I'm not saying my team is. What are those signs for what we're of this? So I guess we should have as parents we also look for signs that our child maybe people instead of kumbaya kind of.
For sure. It's a great question. Yeah, because a lot of times like we don't really think about that, right? And that's like something I should have too, right? Well, no, not at all. Because a lot of us are like, well, I don't want to believe that my kid is the bully, right? But I think too about like observing even to like the ways that they're interacting with their friends. When their friends are over, just kind of listening a little bit, right? Or like giving them their space and their privacy, but observing their interactions with other people. I think too about like, I think something with kids about like if it's always their way, right? There's no compromise, there's no wiggle room, kind of that dominant personality a little bit. Of course, being assertive is different from being dominant, right? But for me, this is more like dominant personality over the kids. Yes. So, I think, and even with the kids too, about like, I know it's hard sometimes to somebody's like, oh, well, you know, your kid is behaving in this way, they're doing this thing that's making my kid upset. The school calls, and it's like, hey, this instance happened. I think those are really good moments where it's like, okay, we're all defenders, protectors of our kids. It's really important, of course, right? But knowing when to hold them accountable for things. If you're getting this feedback that, you know, they are doing these things that are making people feel upset, right? Feel disrespected. Being able to take those as teaching moments, and like you said, just being kind and compassionate people about like, hey, you know that we don't behave that way. We don't treat people that way. Using teaching moments, I think, is really important. So many of us just kind of want to go and like be like, all right, you're grounded, right? Or my kid didn't do that, but using those moments to hold them accountable is so important. Just because it teaches us, right, that we all make mistakes. Sometimes we might not be the nicest person in that moment, right? But we can reflect and we can kind of make those meaningful changes. Hope that was helpful. Did you have anything else for that, Becky or Jenny?
I was just going to say, also think about remember, we're all in our kids are just going forward, they're learning, they're trying to understand and really solve these relationships. But also think about if your kid is saying they're doing something that is, what's really behind that? In other words, usually it's some sort of insecurity. So what's happening, what's going on that makes them feel like they need to treat somebody the way you would want them to.
And I was just trying to think about, I think about when I was a kid, and I was talking to my mom, I'm always going to tell my side of the story, right? I'm always going to put myself in that light. I'm always going to put my best foot forward. And so my kid's not being any different than I was when I was their my age, you know. So keeping that in mind, and I've been having a lot of issues, and I have own friendship issues and things like that. It's hard not to feel that all come out and separate out, like my issues are my issues, and it's fun and be here for my kids and stuff. That can be really hard to do too, because I know when you're biologically related to somebody, it just pulls back a lot of strength that we're not used to ever having felt before. And so that is sometimes hard, especially then if it pulls up some hard memories for you. It's hard to work through all that. There's a lot of work.
For sure. And you think about, like, kids' brains aren't developed yet. They're still learning things. They're leading by example. They don't think through the things that they do, right? So just trying to have compassion for that too, that your brains aren't even fully functioning right now. So just being able to kind of.
Yeah, well, I was just gonna say, I think so much of middle school, and especially with girls, and that's what I have, is managing groups.
Yeah.
Because it's like, so you might have a group of 7 friends. 2 of them like have issues, and then there's taking sides, and then maybe certain people aren't sticking up for you when they should, and maybe you leave that group and go to another group, and now there's some jealousies. I just think a lot of managing group dynamics is what makes middle school hard.
Yeah, 100%. Right, because you have all these different cliques, and it's kind of like in high school, you get a little bit of that, but then people start to blend a little bit more. I truly think middle school is like the hardest time to navigate because you really don't know what you're doing, and everybody's looking at you like you should maybe even know a little bit better, right? But then you have all of these cliques and these people who, are in this clique that you really like some of the people in it, that you have the main person in this clique, and kind of being able to manage that. And I think it's just really creating that safe, supportive environment. Should they feel comfortable to talk to you is huge. Because even if you feel powerless and feel like you can't do anything about it, at least they know that they can come and talk to you about these things. And right, we might find these solutions for it. Again, I'm a huge school counselors supporter, so I always kind of default to them too. Yeah, Jenny.
Just one last comment on that. We try really hard when we are in a lot of drama. But we try really hard to help kids to understand that they don't need to take sides. So that's the other thing is you can say, I really like her and I really like her and we still do both. So I want to be friends with both of them. I want to stay out. The more that the kids are not very involved and stay out of it, the sooner it all can go away. And the kids have to be able to have the courage to say, I'm friends with both of you, I'm all of them.
Yeah, and telling them too, like they're probably not gonna like that for you being like, I'm friends with them, I'm friends with them, I'm not gonna take a side, I'm not in this. They're probably not gonna like hearing that, but it is something that's gonna blow over, right? So yeah, is there anything else? I don't want to keep everybody super late, but yeah.
I just have one quick thing. So I kind of have the opposite of that. I have a 7th grade boy who's very, almost introverted. So I don't really know how to sometimes talk to him about other than the how's your day, fine. He doesn't, at that age, they don't really have, maybe my son's different, but they don't have a lot of friends over. They don't do sleepovers. They don't do that kind of thing. They do maybe some video games or, maybe a birthday party or something like that. Yeah. It's not as interactive as girls. So that's a hard one to try and make sure that everything is going okay, because I don't know that he would tell me if it's not.
Yeah, I think something too, just as you're talking to me about this is just something that I've definitely noticed, and a lot of my colleagues will say the same, who like work with teens, is like putting them in these situations, like anytime you put a teen in a car and you're driving and they just have the ability to talk to you and they're not looking you face to face in the eyes, whatever that is, just finding these little opportunities, I think, to even like, you know, give them these spaces, whatever works for them. If it's like, hey, you know, this is just like something in my mind, and it's like, it wouldn't work at all, but it's like, hey, you know, we got this little mailbox thing, and if there's something bothering you, you tell me, you just put it in there, and I'll just be aware of it. You can tell me if you want to talk about it or not, or if it's just something that I should just be aware of and keep in mind. So I think that's something too of like I said, that car thing just like came into my mind right away. If there's something you're noticing or something, you're like, hey, go take this little drive to, you know, go pick up this thing in another town. Maybe it'll work, maybe it won't, right? But I think with teens, it's like it gives them that space. They don't have to look at you.
Yeah.
And I think too about like I said, of knowing like when to give them the space just to talk and to listen, like, you know, ask those small little questions, letting them take the lead. Or even see if you feel it out and you're like, they seem to be responding really well when I'm asking them more of these questions or giving them open-ended questions. Kind of feeling that out about like what works best for your child particularly, and using that tool that you feel like works well for you.
We recently joined the Alliance to Accounting Coalition for Teachers, and there's material about orders on small talks, and they just had a little conversation here and there to talk about. So I can share that with those are available.
Oh,
Thank you.
yeah, thank you guys. Yeah, go ahead. I think we still have one more hand, so if you wanna, if you have to go, you can get on out of here, don't worry about it, yeah, you're fine with that, yeah.
So, when we have this, my daughter's group that she doesn't feel as happy about, and I think she's that way, but she is noticing that there's already clips that are making. She's like, well, they already have a friend group, and I don't know them, and I don't. So then, how do you help them navigate like getting, you know, like being okay to be like, I can enter this group, like it's not like it's fully formed, and you know,
For sure.
she is, you know, she kind of sees it as that's already an existing group, right? I don't have space there, you know.
Yeah, I think something, and you're like asking that, I guess I'm thinking about like, who is someone in that group that like is the nicest? Who's the nicest? Who do you think that you would get along with the most? Who is the most interesting to you? And forming those friendships. And maybe they're in a class with them and they're like, hey, you know, if there's a group project, ask if you can be partners with them, right? Just find these little moments of, identifying the nicest person, the person that makes you feel most safe and comfortable, the person you feel like you could actually really be friends with. Because a lot of times those people are going to kind of introduce you to the other friends and maybe bring you into that group a little bit. So not so much as like, okay, at lunch, you go and walk up and just ask to sit at their table, but you kind of form these little alliances with people you're interested in. And I think they'll naturally bring you in that way. But it's hard. And I think that's something you should
See that too.
Yeah, to acknowledge to them. Like, I know that's really hard when there are all these existing groups to feel like you're just like joining in. But if they're good people, healthy friendships, like they're gonna welcome you in regardless if the group has already had 6 people in it. You know, like I think too about that. Is there anything you want to add? Oh. Okay. I have my contact information up here. I do have to say my last day at Friends is on Friday, and you are actually my last presentation that I got to do. So I really enjoyed spending the evening with you all. I hope that I gave you some helpful tips, some things to consider every time I do these lessons. When it's like, I hope you walk away with at least something that you learned. Because so much of the information is very basic and kind of surface level, but like I said, you're all here for a reason. It shows me that you're good parents who are trying, and so I hope some of this was at least some new information that might help you a little bit with that. But I have my card. I'm here till Friday, so if there's a question that comes up, you can always ask me. But yeah, so thanks so much for coming, guys.
The only thing I was gonna say, piggybacking on our daily for kids, 3 seasons, 3 activities. We have so many great activities for extracurriculars that have been found not only to help with friendships, but to help with grades and academics and career interest in their future as they go forward and go advance and move on. So, and Georgetown Youth Future is a great extracurricular to get involved with. Yeah. So anyway, thank you for coming again.
Thank you all for coming. Have a good one.